Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, for tuning in. Swiftness here with another video, and in this one, I'll be taking a first look at Restoration Druid moving into Shadowlands. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it terrible? Do you want to play it? Is it going to be the best? Is it going to be the worst? Might be a little bit too early to really say exactly, but obviously, there have been other times where you say it's only alpha, you say it's only beta, and then it ends up coming out and it ended up being the same. So there are circumstances, and Resto Druid had a lot done to it. In particular, it had a lot of honor talents flip over to the talent page, or even potentially in some cases becoming baseline. So Restoration Druid is going to open up a lot more options in terms of talents overall. But the first thing you're going to notice when you log into Shadowlands is that your spell book has been subdivided into not only Restoration, Balance, Feral, and Guardian, or whatever spec of the class you're playing. You'll also have a class spell book. Now, of course, most of these spells were already to every Druid. Barkskin, although now Barkskin has been slightly buffed, it's going to last a little bit longer. Of course, Bear Form, Cat Form. Our good friend Cyclone, this is what I was talking about, the honor talents becoming baseline. So Cyclone is going to be baseline. One improvement I would like to see to Cyclone is in the past, Soul to Forest worked with Cyclone. And I think the reason it couldn't continue to work with Cyclone was because it became a PvP talent. But Soul of the Forest in the past used to be making your Cyclone very fast cast. So you would Swift Mend, then your next Cyclone would be really fast. I would like to see that synergy brought back with Cyclone now being baseline. But as it stands right now, it's a 1.5 second cast. Of course, I'm level 51. I don't have that great stats. I'm not max level, so this it probably between 1.2 and 1.3 maybe the full gear. Dash is the same. Entangling Roots is the same. Ferocious Bite now available regardless of your affinity. You don't need Feral Affinity for a Ferocious Bite. So if you're, let's say, in 2 versus 2, running the Guardian Affinity to get Frenzied Regeneration, you're having a tough time surviving against a Death Knight or a Rogue or something of the like. So you flip it around and then you bring in Guardian Affinity. You'll still have a little bit of cat damage between Shred and Ferocious Bite. Hibernate, of course, was brought back in Battle for Azeroth, but it is still there and available. My cat would like to leave the room. There you go, buddy. My IRL Feral Druid. He's very demanding. All right. And then Iron Fur will now be baseline regardless of your affinity as well. So if you're pinned in Bear, and let's say you're running Feral Affinity instead, you want to get a bit of extra damage, you'll have access to beef up your armor a bit. It's not stupendous. I would have much rather seen Maul come back too. So you have a different rage spender. You got like an aggro rage spender and a defense rage spender. Because right now this is your only rage spender if you're not Guardian Affinity, so you can only beef up your defense. Mango, of course, which was already available. Mighty Bash, which is a talent. However, I'm pretty confident it has been nerfed to a 1-minute cooldown up from 50 seconds, and its duration has been reduced from 5 seconds to 4 seconds. That might be to try and make it competitive with the new talent that came back in the talents page, an old friend. Of course, Moonfire available to all Druids now. Prowl as well. Regrow still. Revive, of course. Shred. Soothe. This is nothing new from Battle for Azeroth. Stampeding Roar is new to Restoration Druid and Balance. Currently only available to Feral and Guardian on Live Realms. This is a great team utility. It's going to serve great raid utility, Mythic Plus utility, Arena, Rated Battleground. It's just a very fun spell overall because it has the use of, I want to sprint myself, I want to sprint my team, I want to sprint to run away, I want to sprint to run in, and it has a significant cooldown, so you really want to make sure that you use it as a good time, at a good time. This is probably one of my most favorite spells in the game overall, just across all of the different content. Deciding how and when you want to use it is always a good time, and it's back now for all specs. Trial form, which is not left. Wrath is called Wrath again. Thank God. It doesn't need like a, I forget what the word is called, but a preface. It doesn't need a preface. It's just Wrath. Wrath's good. It's still here. Aquatic form and flight form. That's gonna be for your basic Druid spell books, and you'll notice I probably somewhat skipped over Bash because it's a talent. But now we'll move into the Restoration tree. And efflorescence hasn't changed. It's still going to be a green circle you place on the ground. I have Frenzied Regeneration because I'm currently Guardian Affinity, which makes it a 31-second cooldown. Pretty significant heal. Percent heals in Battle for Azeroth are the thing you want. I'm curious to see if that ends up staying the same into Shadowlands, because in my mind, the one thing that's making Battle for Azeroth PvP single-handedly a worse experience is the plethora of passives that are along the lines of you attack somebody, you heal yourself. You stood there, you healed yourself. You did something, you healed yourself. And the ones that heal for percentage based are really problematic, but almost all of them, because there's so many of them, they stack up all together. Now this does benefit Resto Druid a lot. It benefits healers a lot. You can just let your damage dealers heal the damage, and you can kind of chill and sit back, but it extends games for an unnecessarily long period of time. So as far as gearing goes, like if there's a new version of Azerite traits or something along those lines, I really hope they avoid things that are, you did something, you existed, you heal yourself, because it's very bad in player versus player. It streamlines the questing experience so you can go mob to mob to mob, but I don't even know if that's a good thing necessarily. After seeing Classic come out, people seem to like want a challenge from the world, like the monsters attacking each other, when you can just run in, pull 50 things, take 0 damage, kill all of them. It's fun maybe a couple of times around, but then you're just like, okay, like this is just a chore now. There's no challenge. So one thing I would really like to see is all of those healing effects gone, or very minimal amount. Right now there's just so many of them. Regardless, when you run Guardian Affinity, you will now have Incapacitating Roar as a benefit. You'll remember this ability from Miss of Pandaria. You can use this to disorient everyone around you and then cast Cyclone while they can't interrupt you because they're disoriented. It's Incapacitating Roar, which makes me think it shares DR with Polymorph, because Incapacitate or Paralysis from Monk is a Polymorph diminishing return. So you should be able to chain these together with no diminishing return effects. However, you will diminishing return a Polymorph, but if you're not playing with a mage, then you'll be in a good position to utilize this. Just important to note that in the past it was on its own diminishing return. So you could do this into a Cyclone, into a Polymorph. You won't be able to do it into the Polymorph, or at least it'll be half duration. Innervate is still here, and there's a new passive for it, which I'll go over in the future. It still just makes everything free rather than giving you mana back. I like this version of Innervate. I think it's a unique version of mana management. There's a lot of other ones that are just gives you mana back, but this one is, okay, I gotta make sure I get all of my expensive spells off as soon as possible, but what if I'm interrupted, what if it's dispelled, what if I'm crowd controlled? There's a lot to take into account. I love mana management. I'm really disappointed in Battle for Azeroth where mana, it's just kind of there. It affects maybe one ability like Spell Steal on mages, or maybe a Fear on Warlock, but Evocation, Life Tap, Mana Gems, it was so much fun to just get that into your rotation, because then as a mage, I'm running out of mana, I really want to get aggressive, I should get ready for that in the next 20 seconds. I'll blink back, Evocate now, so I have mana to do something later. It was something that didn't just immediately end the game. You weren't massively going to be better than somebody, but it was a small little advantage you could build over time over another player. And if you didn't get it timed at the right time, it was a mistake, and you accumulated a bunch of those, and then you could look at the end of the game and say, oh, I could have done that better, I could have done that better, and you'll have something to look at to improve moving into the future. So I would really like to see more mana management tools come back to other classes. Of course, Restoration Druid's in the boat where it already has it, and they have brought some with Water Shield on Restoration Shaman, I believe, and a couple of other ones, maybe Hymn for Priest. I'd love to see Divine Plea for Paladin, and then just more mana management for the classes. That's one thing I really miss in the gameplay overall. Ironbark is still here. It's a 1.5 minute cooldown, however, if you don't have talents for it, so we'll have to take a look at the talents to see if they will help it out anymore. Life Plume is still here. We still have Dispel. It's still only Magic, Curse, and Poison effects. And Nourish is now a talent rather than a player versus player talent. And it's similar, but not similar to old Nourish. If you'll remember the original Nourish, every heal over time effect you had made it faster, and it was very expensive, but it was like boom, 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 boom. That was like your, I need to pick somebody up really quick. That was one thing that I miss from healers, is having a very fast, powerful, but expensive heal. So if you're new and things are looking crazy, you can pump out a bunch of that heal and you can keep your team alive for a little bit. But if you're not mixing in the other ones, which are going to be a slow, low mana cost, low healing output, and then a medium one, everything in the middle, you want to mix between the three of those as a healer, given on the amount of damage that's coming your way, to try and keep your team alive and maintain your mana over the long term. Again, another way as a healer to kind of build a slow advantage and then look at the game and say, oh, I used too many nourishes, or I didn't use enough healing touches, or I should have used regrowth in the middle ground a little bit more. And all the other healers had this as well, with lesser healing wave, greater healing wave, and healing wave. Holy light, flash of light, divine light. All the healers had this type of mini game to them, with a little bit of unique, like regrowth puts a hot up, or nourishes faster with hots and stuff like that. But I miss having healing touch as a baseline. And this version of Nourish, to me, functions more like it's like a regrowth healing touch. It's not going to be super fast, but again, you get triple bonus from Mastery. Mastery is going to be very difficult to utilize here for Restoration Druids in Battle for Azeroth. What it is the more hots I have, so I put Rejuvenation up, that's a hot. I can put another one up with a talent and get Germination. Now I have 2. I can put Life Bloom up and have 3. I can regrowth and I can have 4 if I can find it on my bar. Wild Growth, 6, right? The more hots you have, the more healing you do. So this will do a lot of healing if you use it on a target with a lot of hots. That's when you're going to want to time it. Overgrowth is now a talent rather than an honor talent. So 2 honor talents going into the talents page means that we get more honor talents to choose. And one in particular that I'll get to in the future of this video here that I'm excited to try. Of course, Rejuve is still here. Overgrowth still functions the same. It's just going to apply all your heal over time effects instantly on a 1-minute cooldown. It's 755 mana, and you have 12.5k mana pool. I'd say that that's actually very low. I feel like this is very. It's something like 20. I feel like it's 25% of your mana on live. Of course, coming over from an honor talent to a talent, it now needs to be considered for the overall game. So how is this utilized in a raid or dungeons? So maybe they had to lower the mana cost so that it was still applicable in that content. But this is a very low mana cost for a spell that's very strong, especially with the way that the new Swiftmend works. Regardless, you still have AoE res, you still have Sunfire to apply damage, and it's still to all enemies in 8 yards. You'll notice one change to some specs is that they're limiting the amount of targets that their cleave can hit to like 3 to 5 rather than 100 or infinite. But that's still all targets Sunfire applies to. And this is the big change for Restoration Druid. If you've played Restoration Druid in Battle for Azeroth, you'll know what Grove Tending is, which is an Azerite trait. And it makes it so your regrowth applies another heal over time effect. Very powerful because it synergizes with what I explained, your mastery, increasing your healing overall. And you could run a talent, which is now replaced by Nourish, that gave you 2 Swiftmends. So you get a lot of big heals. Now you only get 1, but they reduce the cooldown in half, or about half. So it comes out about roughly the same, but you still don't have the Azerite trait that made it so powerful. We don't know yet what could possibly replace that, but the biggest change to it is that you can't just do it. You have to have a heal over time effect up, and it will eat it. So to trade off some sustained healing and a bit of mana, you're going to eat that hot, and it's random. So if you have a wild growth up and a rejuve and a regrowth, and then you Swiftmend, it's just going to pick one of them. So it picked my regrowth, and then I can cast another heal. This is going to be very interesting for Soul of the Forest weaving. Do you want to use it for a big regrowth? Because right now in Battle for Azeroth, you're almost always using it on regrowth because it makes it with Spirit of Preservation Essence, which is going away, so maybe you won't use regrowth as much, but you're using it on regrowth and retail in Battle for Azeroth because it provides such a big heal on regrowth. Whereas now you might want to cycle it a little bit more to get your rejuve buff with Soul of the Forest and replace the rejuve that you consumed from the target, depending on how much casting you can do. Thrash is still here. Tranquility is still here. 3-minute cooldown. AoE heal to apply hots. This is back. This is a nice little buddy. Ursul's Vortex. Baseline for Restoration Druid. Actually, I believe this is baseline for Restoration Druid on live as well, but it's available to balance. Or it's on the Restoration Druid Affinity. So if you're any other Druid spec, you can talent into Restoration Affinity and get this. And this is a spell that puts a tornado on the ground. Anyone that tries to run out of it gets pulled back into it. Great to combo with just area of effect spells. Hold someone in line of sight to finish them off. Wild Charge of Talent, of course. Wild Growth still healing 600 allies. Of course, your Mastery that I went over. Increasing your healing based on your HOTS. Omen of Clarity, nothing new here. You get a free heal as your Life Bloom ticks. This is from the Guardian Affinity. Ysera's Gift still here for 3% of your maximum health. And this is one of the changes. So Innervate. You can cast Innervate on an ally, although it needs to be a healer. And you'll still benefit somewhat from it. We don't know yet the pacing of mana on healers. Maybe there's some healers that just dump their mana way too quick. They don't know how to budget properly. So you'll be able to use Innervate on an ally to try and help them out. Or maybe they've got Ascendance available and you don't have a cooldown, so you Innervate them so they can healing surge for free or whatever it is to get really big expensive heals during their cooldowns. So it's still interesting there. You'll have more choice rather than just Innervating yourself. Regrowth, initial heal. I think this is already baseline, maybe before, but regardless, you get a little bit more powerful. And then the healing from your iron. So this used to be a talent, which is no longer there. It was Stonebark. And Overgrowth replaced Stonebark. So Stonebark reduced the cooldown of Ironbark and made heal over time effects heal more on it. So now we don't get the cooldown reduction on Ironbark. Only the bonus healing, as you'll get this by the time you're max level at level 56. That's a pretty big change. You only have a 1.5 minute cooldown Ironbark. That's pretty massive right now. And then this one coming back in is Nature's Swiftness. Doesn't work for Cyclone. Only works for Regrowth and Entangling Roots. So, I mean, the main way I see this is going to be Soul of the Forest, NS Regrowth. If there's too many interrupts for you to deal with, and you'll get a big heal. So maybe that's the trade-off here. You're going to get a big instant heal every minute, but you're not going to have Ironbark on I think it was about a 45-second cooldown on the live game. So some pretty big changes to Restoration Druid overall in terms of their defense. I think this is to sort of hone back in on the Restoration Druid as like an area of effect, a slow-paced, pick-me-up healer. I would love to see Druid go back to the Cyclone playstyle now that it's baseline. So where you're crowd controlling damage dealers to stop damage rather than trying to heal through it all the time. A way to sort of enable that would be, again, to make Soul of the Forest synergize with Cyclone now that it is baseline to make it a slightly faster cast. Or bring in a passive as well that increases the range by 5 yards. We used to have glyphs and other things in the past that would make Cyclone 25 rather than 20. The Cyclone playstyle as Restoration Druid is a lot more satisfying than the sit 40 yards away at a pillar casting heals version of Restoration Druid, at least from my experience playing it in the past. But that's going to conclude our first look for the spells. Now, of course, looking at the talents, Abundance is no different. Nourish is now a baseline talent. We already went over it. Cenarian Ward is still here. As far as choosing this row, I almost always went with the double Swift Mend. So now that Nourish is here, I'm almost already just immediately lost. Like, I'm thrown into chaos. What am I supposed to take now on this row? Do I run the Nourish? Maybe in a composition with a Mage and a Warlock or double Spellcasters where you're not being interrupted as much, Nourish will make sense. However, maybe you're playing with a Warrior and a Death Knight and you don't have time to cast. Cenarian Ward will give you Mastery benefit. It's another heal over time. You don't have to cast it. So it's going to do a great job. And then Abundance for each rejuve. Regrowth's cost is reduced. Maybe in a raid you want to run this because you're going to put Rejuvenation on multiple targets and then you'll get big regrowths for a reduced cost. And that would be my first assessment of this without being able to try it with all the balance tuning at max level and everything. That would be the way that I view this talent row now. Tiger's Dash is the same, still 45-second cooldown replacing Dash. Renewal is still here as a 1.5 minute cooldown big heal. And Wild Charge is still here with no changes. So there's nothing different here on this row. Wild Charge is the most versatile because it's a 15-second cooldown. And look how many different things it does. You can jump forward, you can jump backwards, you can jump up, maybe. Probably not. Sort of, yeah, you can jump up too with the fly up to an ally on a bridge. You can jump up, backwards, forwards, down as well. So it's very versatile on a low cooldown. It's the most fun talent to play with as a Druid because of this. One thing in the past that I used to love to do that you can't do anymore was with Efflorescence. It used to be a mushroom. It still is, but you can't target the mushroom. And when you could target the mushroom, you could jump to it with Wild Charge, like jumping to an ally. So let's say a bunch of people were chasing you. You could put a mushroom on the edge of a cliff, jump off the cliff, and they're all like, kill the rest of you, and following you. You jump back up to the mushroom and laugh at them while they fall to their death. It was a really fun little kiting tool with that fluorescence. I would love to see being able to target the mushroom and jump to the mushroom again. But if you're struggling really hard with melee attacking you, or more particularly, I think rogue mage, because escaping from a rogue in general is difficult with mobility. They're just slowing you so much. You may want a big heal so that when you come out of the stun, boom, big heal. And those are the two that you almost always interchange between. You never really play Tiger's Dash. The Affinities row is slightly different because we get an additional benefit. So if you're on Balance Affinity, you'll get Typhoon baseline. Great for just knocking people away from yourself, interrupting a cast. However, Balance Affinities utility is much lower in the live game because the live game is all about feral affinity and stunning targets at the moment with the pacing of damage. Again, I already talked about that with the healing effects being too prevalent, too many of them. So it all depends on if those healing effects are still in the game or not that enable that type of playstyle. But Guardian Affinity gives you Frenzied Regeneration and damage reduction. Great for surviving on your own if you're being attacked. So if you think you're going to be the target, this is almost always your best choice. If you're playing with classes that are a bit more high priority that the other team can't ignore, Feral Affinity is great. Mythic Plus, we see Feral Affinity all of the time. You're going to get Maim. The downside here is that with Typhoon baked in a Balance Affinity for Resto, rather than being on this row, Heart of the Wild's back instead of it, but you won't be able to get Typhoon and Feral Affinity. Now this matters more for Mythic Plus. When you want Typhoon to knock away from Sanguine or just knock anything, knocks are really good at Mythic Plus. So to get a knock as a Resto Druid, you would have to drop Feral Affinity, which is the other reason you'd bring a Resto Druid to Mythic Plus, is the insane damage that you can do. You still have Sunfire, which is a significant portion of the damage. But I would say, depending on the affix, depending on your group count for Mythic Plus, you may take Balance Affinity just to get access to the knockback. This is also going to reduce Resto Druid's strength if they can't get the knockback and have their damage from Feral Affinity. Although this doesn't seem like a big change to us as PvPers, the way I view this for Mythic Plus is that it's a very big nerf to them. And right now, they're not the best. They're still good, but I think Mistweaver, right, has kind of overtaken them with Mystic Touch and the damage output and the healing that they can do just overall right now. But this is a pretty big nerf to Mythic Plus. However, in PvP, you're still probably just going to bounce between Guardian and Feral Affinity, and maybe against a Mage team, you run Moonconform with the Balance Affinity to avoid Polymorph and still cast Regrowth. But there's nothing really changing in terms of gameplay here. I guess as Guardian, you could get in-cap Clone, but then you're going to trade damage. So they're bringing back that crowd control that can be somewhat frustrating because it feels unpreventable, right? Incapacitated target, they can't do anything, you Cyclone them. It can make them feel helpless. So you don't get the Incapacitate plus the damage of Feral Affinity. You get another stun, which costs combo points. Maim costs combo points. You're already pretty much done when you use Rake from Stealth to stun in the Feral Affinity playstyle in PvP, so it doesn't really make that big of a difference to me that you have that. Unless you're going to make a change down here on this row, which Bash, but I think it's been nerfed. Mass Entanglement's still the same, Area of Effect Root, and Heart of the Wild. So, Heart of the Wild was really good for Balanced Druids. I'm trying to remember exactly for Restoration Druids how good it was. It was just a healing buff. I'm pretty sure it was just a healing buff back in Mists of Pandaria. It was never massive. Now, if you're playing with classes that have stuns, Rogue, if you have a Rogue particularly, maybe you drop Mighty Bash, right? And if you're running Guardian Affinity, you can still use Incapacitating to clone. And then you could go Heart of the Wild to give yourself more survivability because your Bear form gets 20% more health. This is buffing my Guardian. And I will have 2 Frenzied Regenerations. That's big because Frenzied Regeneration heals based on your percent health. You'll have 2 of them for 45 seconds. But you're probably only using this once in a game. Maybe twice if you use it very early. So if another team rushes you down, this is probably the first button you press because you're hoping it comes up again in like a 5 to 6 minute game. Or it's the cooldown that you never press until you really need it because it's a 5-minute cooldown. It's going to be really tough to choose on this row. And I personally feel like it was more powerful in the past than it is right now. Maybe you could run a Feral Affinity Heart of the Wild all-in build in 2s. That could be something. Or have some extra damage in Mythic Plus for a boss. In particular, like the Resto Druid just knows that he's not going to have to heal very much. You pop this with a Feral Affinity, go for some huge damage. It could be something along those lines. But you trade Bash for it. In PvP, this matters a lot. Mythic Plus, maybe not so much, or Raids, not so much. And then Mass Entanglement. Mass Entanglement, to me, its utilization is there's multiple melee chasing you, and you want to make the game your team attacks their healer, their team attacks you as the healer. And so you bring the two people attacking really far away from their healer and root them so it can't be dispelled. And then in raids, this interacts with mechanics where ads spawn. So if an ad spawns that moves, and if it gets somewhere, it does something really bad, you just have this, so you root it. And those are almost always the utilizations. Or maybe on a pole in a dungeon before all the mobs run you down, you root them and break one of the roots and then pull it. It has more utilization in those circumstances, but it's not... In a raid environment, super effective, but in Mythic Plus and in PvP, Heart of the Wild and Bash are going to be more so what you're kind of debating which is going to be utilized. And when I test this more and max level comes out, I'll be letting you guys all know what I think in terms of which is the best overall, what situations should you take them. And make sure you follow my stream, twitch.tv/supertease, and I'll be going over that as soon as it's available. I'm interested in trying the Torghast Tower. That's up right now. It's a new PvE kind of solo climb the tower, get as high as you can get kind of thing. I'm interested in trying that, but I wanted to make this video first. Soul to Force, no changes here. However, I would like to see it interact with Cyclone now that Cyclone is baseline. Cultivation is just an extra heal over time effect. Might be super effective with a Nourish build. This talent sort of fell off, at least in player versus player. To my memory, it fell off in PvE as well. Soul to Force just overtook it, having massive benefits with Spirit of Preservation, or Tree of Life as just a big raid cooldown during a phase that's just a ton of damage output. In PvP right now, you're almost always running Soul to Force, never Tree of Life or Cultivation. In PvE with big cooldown windows where like every healer is pressing a cooldown for each window, Tree of Life is great for that. But Cultivation might have a place now if you're running a Nourish build, and it's something I'll try when the testing comes out. But Tree of Life has always been the good like staple of, I'm a new Resto Druid, I don't know what I'm doing, I need this. It's going to keep me alive for at least 30 seconds. You can press it and just cast Regrowth over and over and over. So it's a good talent if you're a new Druid and you just want to play the game and you're just, I don't know how to live, I don't know what I'm doing. It's kind of like your training wheels talent, but it has fallen off in terms of its actual practicality. It used to have more practicality in the past for things against Feral Druids, for example, but that could also just be because Feral Druids are Feral Druids, so who knows. But this row is a little bit more interesting now that Nourish is here. Inner Peace, reducing the cooldown of Tranquility, decent for big AoE heals, but now with Overgrowth on this row in PvP, you're pretty much, I think, going to be taking this. You almost always took Overgrowth anyway, as an honor talent or as a Conflict and Strife. So, but Spring Blossoms can also be nice because it scales with your mastery. So I see right now the way that the talents page is speaking to me is you could run a Nourish build with all the mastery and Cultivation Spring Blossoms and get a bunch of extra hots and do like a sustained Nourish Druid, which it's good in theory, but Druids also shapeshift a lot and move around a lot. So again, to be like a totem healer, you're like more of a shaman or a paladin where you're just in place casting heals. Will you be able to compete with a paladin and a shaman who are built to do that, trying to like half and half it? Maybe this is in case your raid group doesn't have paladins or shamans, so you can kind of sort of turn yourself into a quasi-pally shami or something along those lines, but might not work too well in actual arena. But I'll have to wait and see and test that. Photosynthesis, no difference with Life Plume. This is great against Shadow Priests in particular, because they'll be spam dispelling all your hots, and you can just apply this, get the immediate heal over and over and over and over, rather than Germination where it's expensive to apply it multiple times and get it dispelled. And then Flourish has been always great in raid content because you can just refresh a ton of hots on everybody. So if you got a Spring Blossoms down, Cultivation procced on everyone, Rejuve on multiple people, you Flourish with Tranquility up and everybody gets all their hots. It's no wonder this is great for raids, maybe even raided Battlegrounds, but in Arena, maybe Mythic Plus, but not really. Smaller group content like 5 or lower, it's always Germination, and then maybe Photosynthesis in circumstances where there's like heavy purge dispels on you, which isn't often in PvE. So Germination is like your Mythic Plus and Flourish is your raid. Not much change there. It's really just the Overgrowth, Heart of the Wild, Nourish, and the extra ability on your Affinities. as far as your choice. No new trinket options in terms of how to escape crowd control. But because all those talents, Nourish is here, but it's not. It's just a bug. It's not supposed to be there. You're going to have a lot more choices now that you have Cyclone baseline. I mean, I can now try the disentanglement to get out of snares for my team. The main downside with that is that Efflarescence is super expensive. But the benefit is that you get out of all the snares. So Frost Death Knights, Frost Mages, they're just applying huge snares to you the whole time. You'll be able to almost always run Thorns now into double melee, or even if there's only one melee on the other team. Deep Roots is the talent that I was super excited about talking about earlier, being able to try more. So rooting a target that's dotted with Affliction changes, and I can't wait to make the Affliction video. Maybe we see Affliction and Druid come back together with Elemental Shaman. Elemental Shaman's getting a lot of changes, so we see that classic Lock Shaman Druid with Deep Roots, so they're dotted up, they're rooted, they can't move, they're withering down, and the Eli Shaman blasts them out with a big Fulminate. Deep Roots might end up coming back. I could see that being a decent composition based on the changes here, and that's just purely based on theory, because we can't test the actual PvP yet. Focus Growth will likely always be a baseline that you're taking. Encroaching Vines can have good synergy with Mass Entanglement, so if double melee are chasing you, like that healer race situation that I explained earlier, it can be great, because then you'll just reduce their physical damage by a little bit. Mark of the Wild is a great talent as well to any classes that do Nature, Fire, Frost, or Arcane damage. That's probably going to be baseline against any spec, if there is a spec on the other team that has this. Super effective against mages, because they kind of have to spell steal it, or they're doing 15% less damage, and if they spell steal it, boom, you overgrowth, you got all your hots back. Great to deal with that stressful situation. Revitalize, just great little pick-me-up for melee. Entangling Bark has been one that I have not picked in so long. I think this used to be a PvP set bonus. But now with Iron Bark having no cooldown reduction, it's 1.5 minutes. This thing sucks. Like, it's just, there's no point to play this almost ever. 1.5 minute cooldowns. Maybe if it has synergy with Deep Roots? But I think in the past I tested it and it doesn't synergize with Deep Roots. It's like a different version of Entangling Roots. If it synergized with Deep Roots, maybe, but I almost just like ignore it. I just like overlook it every time, you know. It's like he wants to be my friend, and it's just like, oh, sorry, dude. No, not looking at you today. Master Shapeshifter, great with Feral Affinity to get some added damage. Maybe we can take this a little bit more, especially in 2 versus 2. And then Guardian Affinity to reduce crit. Maybe we take that. The Balance Affinity one is meh. Mostly because Balance Affinity is never used to actually attack. Because if you're a feral, it's going to do less damage than just being a cat. If you're a bear, it's going to do less damage than being a cat. If you're a resto, you don't have time to do damage like that. So the Balance Affinity part of this Master Shapeshifter tier, it's never utilized. It's never utilized for that. Maybe, so I would like to see Balance Affinity on this Master Shapeshifter updated. As far as what? I mean, it would have to make like Star Surge hit insanely. Like, you would have to hit really hard. I wonder here. Just if I go Balance Affinity, what does Heart of the Wild do? Ooh, that's a good thing I did this now. You can get instant Star Surge. So if you ran Master Shapeshifter, then reducing the speed of Star Surge is pointless. I don't see, the Balanced Affinity one is wonky, I think. It's not going to work out too well overall. I was thinking maybe like Instant Roots, but then Instant Roots is also crazy. But right now, I never look at this talent for its Balance Affinity. Early Spring can be great if you're just struggling. Again, if you're a new healer, it can be great because it'll buff your mastery. They also have good synergy with Nourish. The main downside of this, because it's good for you as a new healer, is because it makes it easier. You don't have to cast it, you can't be interrupted, and it grants you a lot of extra healing. The downside, you run out of mana. So back to that situation I described with other healers where you have a fast heal, super expensive, a medium heal, and a slow heal. If you're spamming out all those fast ones because they're easier to use, you'll stay alive, you'll get into the game a bit, but you might end up losing because you run out of mana much faster than other teams. But these talents can be good if you want to just step in and you've never really played and you're afraid of dying. They can be good training wheels, but I wouldn't recommend keeping them long term, but they can be decent, especially now that you can take it with Overgrowth and the talents, Nourish and the talents, Cyclone and Baseline. You've got a lot more options here. So My overview for Restoration Druid is that they're looking like a solid spot. I would say overall, maybe the downsides is that your Iron Bark is a significantly longer cooldown, so that may actually make you rely on cycloning damage dealers more often to stop damage. And that will be enabled if you play with spellcasters, which are receiving changes, Ellie Shaman and Affliction Warlock. I feel like those are what I see most positively so far viewed, would be Affliction and Elemental Shaman. So if you're playing those types of compositions, that'll be great. It's going to work out really well. Or the Rogue Mage setups with the Rogue Mage and the Restoration Druids, these types of builds, I anticipate, which is very similar to Miss of Pandaria, if you recall back then, with Warlock, Shaman Druid, and Rogue Mage Druid, and then Shadow Priest Mage Druid as well. So it's moving back into that. I'm going to be looking at a video for Covenants as a standalone video for the Covenants, but right now this is going to conclude it for Restoration Druid. I think it's in a great spot. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed the content. Remember to subscribe. Follow my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Subatees, where I'm going to be streaming live, whether it be the live game. I'm pushing rating on Demon Hunter and Druid at the moment. And I'm going to do a lot of just reviews here of all the different specs, my assessment of them. I've played all the specs in the past. I watch other people who play the specs at high ratings or high Mythic Plus keys, and I'm trying to take their opinions that I've gathered and apply them logically with my own thought process after playing the game for so long, and provide it with a meaningful context to you so that you can use it for your decision making moving into Shadowlands, because picking a main can be really stressful. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll catch you on the next one. Have a good one.